Welcome to the 10th session of our study of the book of Genesis. This week we're going to read chapters 27, 28, 29, and 30. Jacob and Rebekah conspire to gain Isaac's blessing. Jacob goes off to Mesopotamia to find a wife and meets Laban's daughter, Rachel, at the well. He's deceived by Laban into marrying Rachel's older sister. After several years of working for Laban, Jacob, his 2 wives and children, and his livestock are ready to head back home. But first we begin with a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So the story that begins at the end of chapter 26 and goes through the 9th verse of chapter 28 is perhaps the most brilliantly staged narrative in the book of Genesis. It is a simple story of deception that invokes all 5 of our senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, and sight, especially the sense of sight. Isaac, who is nearly blind, is ultimately able to see what his younger son is doing and sees his way to the proper transferal of the blessing anyway. The story is framed by 2 stories about Esau and his wives. At the beginning, the one we read last week, by marrying 2 Hittite women, and at the end by making a pathetic attempt to get back in his father's good graces. So we begin chapter 27, and I'll read verses 1 through 5. And it happened when Isaac was old that his eyes grew too bleary to see, and he called to Esau his elder son and said to him, "My son." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Look, I have grown old, and I know not how soon I shall die. So now take up, pray, your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field, and hunt me some game, and make me a dish of the kind that I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that I may solemnly bless you before I die." And Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went off to the field to hunt game to bring. So Isaac is a man of taste and touch who can no longer see well. The blessings he promises, something like a solemn blessing or an absolute blessing. In verse 5, the convention of biblical narrative, there can only be 2 participants in a conversation. Although one could be a crowd, for example, Isaac addressing the crowd cheers. The dialogue in this story is made up of 7 interlocking scenes, each with 2 members each. The first is Isaac and Esau, then Rebekah and Jacob, Jacob and Isaac, Isaac and Esau, Rebekah and Jacob, Rebekah and Isaac, and finally Isaac and Jacob in the final dialogue, which is in the first part of chapter 28. The word blessing is also repeated 7 times in these 7 scenes. In the first scene, we have Rebekah eavesdropping, someone like Sarah listening behind the tent post while Abraham was hosting the 3 visitors way back in chapter 28. So we go on with verse 6 through 13. And Rebekah said to Jacob, her son, "Look, I have heard your father is speaking to Esau your brother, saying, 'Bring me some game and make me a dish that I may eat, and I shall bless you in the Lord's presence before I die.' So now, my son, listen to my voice, to what I command you. Go pray to the flock, and fetch me from there 2 choice kids, that I may make them into a dish for your father of the kind he loves. And you shall bring it to your father, and he shall eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Look, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. What if my father feels me, and I seem a cheat to him, and bring on myself a curse and not a blessing?" And his mother said, "Upon me your curse, my son. Just listen to my voice, and go fetch them for me." So here's the second scene, this time with Rebekah and Jacob. Jacob's sons use kids as a vehicle of deception in chapter 38 when they bring him Joseph's coat soaked in kids' blood. Jacob's son Judah is fooled by skins of a kid much later in the narratives. Kids play a role in deception in this book of Genesis. Jacob points out that his brother is a hairy man. So he's not concerned so much with the fact that he's planning to deceive his father so much as worried about being caught. We go on with 14 through 27 into the third scene. And he went and he fetched and he brought to his mother, and his mother made a dish of the kind his father loved. And Rebekah took the garments of Esau, her elder son, the finery that was with her in the house, and she put them on Jacob, her younger son, and the skins of the kids she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she placed the dish and the bread she had made in the hand of Jacob, her son. And he came to his father and said, Father? And he said, Here I am. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have spoken to me. Rise, pray, sit up, and eat of my game, so that you may solemnly bless me. And Isaac said to his son, How is it that you found it so soon, my son? And he said, Because the Lord your God gave me good luck. And Isaac said to Jacob, Come close, pray, that I may feel of you, my son, whether you are my son Esau or not. And Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt him, and he said, The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are Esau's hands. But he did not recognize him, for his hands were like Esau's hands, hairy. And he blessed him, and he said, Are you my son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, Serve me, that I may eat of the game of my son, so that I may solemnly bless you. And he served him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And Isaac his father said to him, Come close, pray. Kiss me, my son. And he came close and kissed him, and he smelled his garments, and he blessed him, and he said, See, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. So, this is the third scene. This is the time we see Isaac and Jacob together. We notice that Isaac asks who this is. Jacob isn't going to be able to just slip in with a bowl of stew and have Abraham assume he was Esau. Our narrator uses the term elder son, but Jacob and later Esau used the term firstborn. In verse 19, Jacob tells his father to rise, pray, sit up, so that he can eat. Apparently, Isaac is not only blind, but he's bedridden as well. His voice sounds like Jacob, but his hands were hairy like Esau. Isaac didn't recognize him. Later on, Jacob is deceived by his sons when he doesn't recognize them. And of course, the sons don't recognize Joseph when they meet with him in Egypt. This is clearly going to be a theme of not recognizing family members. But it turns out Rebekah is pretty smart. She's thought of both the touch and the smell. Those are the important elements in this particular episode, this particular scene. So we go on with chapter 27, verse 28 and 29. This is the blessing. May God grant you from the dew of the heavens and the fat of the earth an abundance of grain and drink. May people serve you and nations bow before you. Be overlord to your brothers. May your mother's sons bow before you. Those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you blessed. So again, this is the Isaac's blessing of Jacob, who he thinks is Esau. We go on with 30 through 36. And it happened as soon as Isaac finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob barely had left the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came back from the hunt. And he too made a dish and brought it to his father, and he said to his father, Let my father rise and eat of the game of his son, so that you may solemnly bless me. And his father Isaac said, Who are you? And he said, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. And Isaac was seized with a very great trembling, and he said, Who is it, then, who caught game and brought it to me, and I ate everything before you came and blessed him? Now blessed he stays. When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out with a great and very bitter outcry, and he said to his father, Bless me too, father. And he said, Your brother has come in deceit, and he has taken your blessing. And he said, Was his name called Jacob, that he should trip me now twice by the heels? My birthright he took, and look, now he's taken my blessing. And he said, Have you not kept back a blessing for me? So, as soon as Isaac has finished eating, Esau shows up. Jacob ducks out just in the nick of time. Things are happening at breakneck speed. Esau, remember Esau is still Esau, but he has already sold his firstborn rights to Jacob. Isaac is obviously confused, but quickly figures out that he's been tricked by Jacob. So we go on with 37 through 40. And Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Look, I made him overlord to you, and all his brothers I gave him as slaves. And with grain and wine I endowed him. For you, then, what can I do, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Do you have but one blessing, my father? Bless me too, father." And Esau raised his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said to him, "Look, from the fat of the earth be your dwelling, and from the dew of the heavens above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother shall you serve. And when you rebel, you shall break off his yoke from your neck." So this is a continuation of the fourth dialogue in the series. Here we see Esau in a near panic. His brother has tricked him again, and he wants his own blessing, so Isaac does his best. In the beginning, this blessing is very much like the blessing Isaac had given Jacob earlier. The bounty of heaven and earth can be enjoyed by more than one son, after all. Overlordship, however, cannot be shared. Esau doesn't get the blessing of the firstborn that he wanted. He will have to struggle to make his way. This verse alludes to the political fortunes of Edom, the Transjordan nation of which Esau is said to be the founder. So there's an element of political allegory in this also. So we go to 41 through 45. And Esau seethed with resentment against Jacob over the blessings of his father had blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, "As soon as the time for mourning my father comes round, I will kill Jacob my brother." And Rebekah was told the words of Esau, her elder son, and she sent and summoned Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Look, Esau your brother is consoling himself with the idea he will kill you. So now, my son, listen to my voice and rise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and you may stay with him a while until your brother's wrath subsides, until your brother's rage against you subsides, and he forgets what you did to him. And I shall send and fetch you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both on one day?" So Esau had said he was going to kill his brother only to himself in verse 40. But apparently he was unable to restrain himself and told other people in the household. So Rebekah has picked up on this somehow. Rebekah says, "Listen to my voice," when she speaks to Jacob. These are the first words she used, same words she used at the beginning of the chapter to speak with Jacob. She doesn't want the two of them to kill each other. We suspect that Esau must be physically stronger than Jacob, but Jacob has shown the ability to be crafty, so this could be a real battle. We go on with verse 46, the last verse in the chapter. And Rebekah said to Isaac, "I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from Hittite women like these, from the native girls, what good to me is life?" She doesn't want the two of them to kill themselves, but she's in this dialogue between Rebekah and Isaac. Rebekah once again has a plan. She's willing to take on this new challenge. She doesn't just say she doesn't want Jacob to take a Canaanite wife. She loathes Hittite women. She has a sense of utter revulsion, she says. Life isn't worth living because of the native daughters-in-law that Esau has inflicted on her. She not only creates a pretext for Jacob to go to the land of her brother, but she discredits Esau in the same breath without even using Esau's name. So we go on to chapter 28, and I'll read verse 1 through 5. Isaac summoned Jacob and blessed him and commanded of him and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Rise, go to Paddan Aram to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take you from there a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And may El Shaddai bless you and make you fruitful and multiply, so that you become an assembly of peoples. And may he grant you the blessing of Abraham to you and your seed as well, that you may take hold of the land of your sojournings, which God granted to Abraham. And Isaac sent Jacob off, and he went to Paddan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, brother of Rebekah, mother of Jacob and Esau. So in this final dialogue, we have Isaac blessing Jacob. He gives him instructions to take a wife in Mesopotamia. Isaac, whatever misgivings he may have had about Jacob's deception, knows he has irretrievably given him his blessing, and he has no choice but to reiterate it in his son's departure. Verses 3 and 4 are the actual blessing. Notice God is referred to here as El Shaddai. The style used in this blessing uses the lofty language of procreation, proliferation, and inheritance characteristic of the priestly source, quite different from the earthly political language of chapter 27, which probably came from the J or the Yahweh source. Isaac is confirming the blessing he has already given. It's not a new blessing. He's just confirming that, but he's using a more lofty language in this one. We go on with verse 6 through 9. And Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob, and he sent him off to Paddan Aram to take him a wife. And there when he blessed him and charged him, saying, You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. And Jacob listened to his father and to his mothers, and he went to Paddan Aram. And Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan were evil in the eyes of Isaac his father. And Esau went to Ishmael, and he took Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to his wives, as a wife. So Esau overhears Isaac giving this second blessing to his brother Jacob, and he seems to think that endogamy, or marrying within one's own family, must be sufficient condition for getting his father's blessing. So he goes to his uncle Ishmael and marries one of his daughters, Mahalath, and he still doesn't get it. It is though he is asking again, Do you have but one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. But it's too late for that. That ship has already sailed. So we go on with 10 through 17. And Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran, and he came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night. For the sun had set, and he took one of the stones of the place and put it at his head. And he lay down in that place, and he dreamed, and look, a ramp was set up against the ground with its top reaching in the heavens. And look, messengers of God were going up and coming down it. And look, the Lord was poised over him, and he said, I, the Lord, am God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, to you I will give it and to your seed. And your seed shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall burst forth to the west, and the east, and the north, and the south. And all the clans of the earth shall be blessed through you, and through your seed. And look, I am with you, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken to you. And Jacob awoke from his sleep, and he said, Indeed, the Lord is in this place, and I did not know. And he was afraid, and he said, How fearsome is this place! This can be but the house of God, and this is the gate of the heavens. The word place occurs 6 times in this little short story. This is the tale of the transformation of an anonymous place through vision into Bethel, a house of God. It is likely that Jacob would have placed the stone alongside his head rather than under his head. Stones don't make good pillows. Stones became a thing for Jacob, and they play a big role in several of the Jacob stories. The structure Jacob saw in his dream was more likely a ramp than a ladder, as we hear traditionally. It's probably associated with the Mesopotamian ziggurat, a vast ramp with terraced landings. The Lord he saw could have been on the ramp, but here we have a confirmation of Isaac's blessing. Here again, we have all the clans of the earth will be blessed through you. This is at least the 5th time we have heard this blessing in Genesis. We go on with 18 through 22. And Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone he had put at his head, and he set it as a pillar and poured oil over its top. And he called the name of the place Bethel, though the name of the town before had been Luz. And Jacob made a vow, saying, if the Lord God be with me and guard me on this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I set as pillar will be a house of God. And everything that you give me, I will surely tithe it to you. So it's not clear what it means when he says the name of the town that has been Luz. There was no town there, it was just a place. But now the place was called Bethel. Jacob makes a conditional vow here. If God does all these great things, then the Lord will be my God. The Lord has already promised all this stuff. Jacob is seen as a suspicious bargainer. He wants to be sure that God fulfills his side of the bargain before he commits to fulfilling what he has to do. He has a long journey ahead of him, and he doesn't have 10 camels and a platoon of servants to go with him. So he's all alone on this journey. This scene has been the front end frame of the middle of the Jacob narrative. A variation of this same story comes early in chapter 32 when we see the back end of the frame. Jacob, while still a schemer, is beginning to look like a cross between his grandfather Abraham, the visionary, and his son Joseph, the dreamer. We go on to chapter 29, and we'll do verse 1 through 6. And Jacob lifted his feet and went to the land of the Easterners. And he saw, and look, there was a well in the field, and look, 3 flocks of sheep were lying beside it. For from that well they would water the flocks, and the stone was big on the mouth of the well. And when the flocks were gathered there, they would roll the stone from the mouth of the well, and would water the sheep, and put back the stone in its place on the mouth of the well. And Jacob said to them, my brothers, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. And he said to them, do you know Laban, son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. And he said to them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And look, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. So there's an interplay in here between Jacob and the narrator. We have Jacob who sees the well, and then he sees the flock or the sheep. The narrator explains that the well is used to water the sheep. Jacob sees the stone covering the well. Then the narrator explains how the Haranites remove the stone from the well to water the sheep. Eventually we get to, and look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. We go on with 7 through 14. And he said, look, the day is still long. It is not time to gather in the herd, water the sheep, and take them to graze. And they said, we cannot until all the flocks have gathered and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well, and we water the sheep. He was still speaking with them when Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it happened when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, and his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that he stepped forward and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well, and watered the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted his voice, and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kin, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And it happened when Laban heard the report of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran toward him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he recounted to Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, indeed, you are my bone and my flesh. So Jacob's heroic feat of rolling away this huge stone from the top of the well, it usually took several people to move that stone. He did it all by himself. This is the counterpart of his mother's watering the camels in the Rebekah at the well story. Jacob was apparently stronger than we may have supposed. Obviously, this is another Jacob stone story. There will be more. Of course, this is the second of the betrothal at the well scenes. The third one involves Moses in the book of Exodus. But Jacob is very different than his father, who was back home when the servant traveled to a foreign land to find him a wife. It's also Jacob, not Rachel, who draws the water in this story. The stone over the well may be symbolic of Rachel's womb, which may be shut up for long periods of her marriage. Again, we see the young girl Rachel running home to spread the news. And also again, Laban rushes out to meet him. Maybe he's looking for nose rings and bracelets. We go on with verse 15 through 21. And he stayed with him a month's time, and Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kin, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger Rachel. And Leah's eyes were tender, but Rachel was comely in features and comely to look at. And Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, better I should give her to you than to give her to another man. Stay with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to be in his eyes but a few days in his love for her. And Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is done, and let me come to bed with her. So Laban has already put Jacob to work for a month, and he decides he might owe him some kind of wages. Jacob asked for his daughter Rachel in marriage, and Jacob said 7 years in his eyes was but a few days. A few days is exactly the amount of time Rebekah said he should stay with Laban. So that works out perfectly for him, right? 22 through 30. And Laban gathered all the men of his place and made a feast. And when evening came, he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob. And he came to bed with her. And Laban gave Zilpah, his slave girl, to Leah his daughter as her slave girl. And when morning came, look, she was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? And why have you deceived me? And Laban said, it is not done thus in our place to give the younger girl before the firstborn. Finish out the bridal week of this one, and we shall give you the other as well for the service of you rendered me for still another 7 years. And so Jacob did, and when he had finished out the bridal week of the one, he gave him Rachel his daughter as wife. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his slave girl, as her slave girl. And he came to bed with Rachel too, and indeed loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served him still another 7 years. And the Lord saw that Leah was despised. And we'll go on. So the great deceiver has been deceived here, but he is game to go on for another 7 years to get Rachel. Look at the irony here. Laban says it's not done in our place to put the younger girl before the firstborn. Jacob, back in his place, figured out how to put the younger before the firstborn via some deception, of course. Deceived by darkness as he deceived his near blind father, relying on only the sense of touch. Now we go on to 31 through 35. And the Lord saw that Leah was despised, and he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren, and Leah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Reuben. For she said, yes, the Lord has seen my suffering, for now my husband will love me. And she conceived again and bore a son. And she said, yes, the Lord has heard I was despised, and he gave me this one too. And she called his name Simeon. And she conceived again and bore a son. And she said, this time my husband will join me, for I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name is called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son. She said, this time I sing praise to the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. And she ceased bearing children. So again, here we see that the names are related to words that sound similar or meanings the mother just makes up, not necessarily what the name traditionally would mean. Reuben would normally mean see a son. Leah translates it as God has seen my suffering. Simeon sounds like Shammah or Shimon, which means has heard. Levi sounds like Yelivah, which means will join. Judah sounds like Uda, which means sing praise. So the names are what they sound like, other words that they sound like are what gives it meaning. Leah was optimistic that each son would make Jacob love her, but it never seemed to work out that way. We move on to chapter 30, and we'll start with verse 1 through 8. So in the first part of this chapter, we continue the procreation theme. We had God had promised Abraham's seed as great as the stars. In the 100 years after Isaac's birth, we still only have Esau and Jacob, and apparently Esau doesn't count. So we start with verse number 1 through 8, and we have this procreation story here. We're going to get on with the growing of the families here. And Rachel saw that she had borne no children to Jacob, and Rachel was jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me sons. If you don't, I'm a dead woman." And Jacob was incensed with Rachel, and he said, "Am I instead of God, who has denied you fruit of the womb?" And she said, "Here is my slave girl Bilhah. Come to bed with her, that she may give birth on my knees, so that I too shall be built up through her." And she gave him Bilhah, her slave girl, as a wife, and Jacob came to bed with her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, "God granted my cause. Yes, he heard my voice, and he gave me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's slave girl, conceived again and bore a second son to Jacob. And Rachel said, "In awesome grapplings I have grappled with my sister, and yes, I won out." And she called his name Naphtali. So this is the first recorded speech of Rachel after over a decade of narrative. The first thing she says is reminiscent of the first words of Sarah in chapter 16. "Look, the Lord has kept me from bearing children," is what Sarah said. Essentially the same thing for Rachel. But it sounds a little more like Esau here. "Look, I'm at the point of death, so why do I need a birthright?" With Rachel, it's, "I'm at the point of death. I need sons." And she demands sons, not just one son. Jacob properly responds that he cannot play the role of God. So Rachel takes the surrogate route, just like Sarai did with her slave girl. "Give birth on my knees" in verse 3 sounds kind of strange, but placing a newborn on someone's knees was a gesture of adoption. The verb Dan suggests vindication of a legal plea, and that's what her firstborn was named Dan. We go on with 9 through 13. And Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, and she took Zilpah, her slave girl, and gave her to Jacob his wife. And Zilpah, Leah's slave girl, bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Good luck has come." And she called his name Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's slave girl, bore a second son to Jacob, and Leah said, "What good fortune, for the girls have acclaimed me fortunate." And she called his name Asher. Asher is derived from Asher, which means good fortune. So that's where that name came from. We're going to go on with 14 through 21. And Reuben went out during the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to Leah his mother. And Rachel said to Leah, "Give me, pray, some of the mandrakes of your son." And she said, "Is it not enough that you have taken my husband, and now you would take the mandrakes of my son?" And Rachel said, "Let him lie with you tonight in return for the mandrakes of your son." And Jacob came in the field in the evening, and Leah went to meet him and said, "With me you will come to bed, for I have clearly hired you with the mandrakes of my son." And he lay with her that night, and God heard Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, "God has given my wages, because I gave my slave girl to my husband." And she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. And Leah said, "God has granted me a goodly gift. This time my husband will exalt me, for I have borne him 6 sons." And she called his name Zebulun. And afterward she bore a daughter, and she called her name Dinah. So mandrakes were plants with a tomato-like fruit, usually primarily for medicinal purposes, but they were also thought to be an aphrodisiac. So this argument that we have between Leah and Rebekah is also reminiscent of the bartering of privilege for the stew between Esau and Jacob. Here the younger one is the one that gives up the privilege. Jacob just seems to go to bed with whoever these two women tell him to. You made a bargain, you made a deal, okay. Having given Jacob 6 sons, halfway to the sanctified tribal group of 12, Leah is again under the illusion that Jacob will now begin to love her. We notice there's no naming speech for Dinah because she is a girl. She's the daughter and will not be a founder of a tribe, so we don't have to do the naming speech. We go on with 22 through 24. And God remembered Rachel, and God heard her, and he opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son. And she said, God has taken away my shame. And she called his name Joseph, which is to say, may the Lord add me another son. So, taken away is proposed as a meaning for Asaph, which sounds like Joseph or Joseph. But you notice she's still not satisfied. She still wants another son. So we go on with 25 through 34. And it happened when Rachel bore Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me off that I might go to my place and to my land. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have done for you. And Laban said to him, if, pray, I have found favor in your eyes, I have prospered, and the Lord has blessed me because of you. And he said, name me your wages, that I may give them. And he said to him, you know I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For the little you had before my time has swollen to a multitude, and the Lord has blessed you on my account. And now, when shall I too provide for my household? And he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you need give me nothing if you will do this one thing for me. Let me go back and herd your flock and watch them. I shall pass through all your flocks today to remove from them every spotted and speckled animal, and every dark-colored sheep, and the speckled and spotted among the goats. And that will be my wages. Then my honesty will bear witness for me in the days to come when you go over my wages. Whatever is not spotted and speckled among the goats and dark-colored among the sheep shall be accounted stolen by me. And Laban said, let it be just as you say. So Jacob has given Laban several years of service beyond the 14 years that he originally agreed to. But we have Laban still seems to hesitate before asking what Jacob actually wants for his wages. Jacob begins by laying out the general justification for his claims on Laban, then makes it seem as though he is asking for almost nothing. Most sheep, after all, are white. Most goats are black. He just wants the oddball ones, the speckled and the dark ones. We go on with 35 through 43. And he removed on that day the spotted and speckled he-goats, and all the bridled and speckled she-goats, and every one that had white on it, and every dark-colored one among the sheep, and he gave them over to his sons, and he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob herded the remaining flocks of Laban. And Jacob took himself moist rods of poplar and almond and plane tree, and peeled white strips in them, laying bare the white on the rods. And he stood the rods he had peeled in the troughs, in the white channels, water channels from which the flocks came to drink, opposite the flocks, which went into heat when they came to drink. And the flocks went into heat at the rods, and the flocks bore brindled, spotted, and speckled young, and the sheep Jacob kept apart, and he placed them facing the spotted and all dark-colored in Laban's flocks. And he set himself herds of his own, and he did not set them with Laban's flocks. And so whenever the vigorous of the flocks went into heat, Jacob put the rods in full sight of the flocks in the troughs for them to go into heat by the rods. And for the weaklings of the flocks he did not put them. And so the feeble ones went to Laban, and the vigorous ones to Jacob. And the man swelled up mightily, and he had many flocks, and female and male slaves, and camels and donkeys. So Laban pulled out all the speckled he-goats and she-goats and sent them off with his sons to make sure Jacob couldn't get to them. One theory is that the rods are just a decoy. Recessive traits would normally show up in about 25% of the goats in the first breeding, and 12.5% in the second season, and 6.25% in the third season. So Jacob only encourages breeding of the more vigorous animals, which would more likely carry recessive genes. At least that's one of the theories. However the scheme works, Jacob has beaten Laban at their game of mutual deception and has come out well ahead on this time. He came to Laban hat in hand and leaves with 2 wives, several children, slaves, livestock, donkeys, all kinds of stuff. And that's the end of chapter 30. So Jacob is the great deceiver. Certainly he helped along by his mother Rebekah, who has shown herself to be always 2 steps ahead of the game. Esau, on the other hand, just doesn't quite understand how the game is played. Perhaps he's too busy enjoying life to think ahead. He's no schemer worthy of competing with his brother, and perhaps not worthy of the blessing of the overlordship that has eluded him. Abraham may be the visionary father of the Hebrew nation, but Isaac is the placeholder. And Jacob, no matter his flaws, is the central character of the book of Genesis. He is the great deceiver who steals his brother's birthright. He built a worship center at Bethel. He will wrestle with God. He is to become the father of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. So next week, we do chapter 31 through 34. Jacob returns to the land of his father and confronts his brother who has threatened to kill him, but not before he confronts God face to face. So until then, be safe, and we hope to see you Wednesday.